I just want to give a little background before starting. I understand the controversy and the problem people have with this game because of a certain someone. I'm not here to make some grand gesture. I just like the Harry Potter series and the world, and that's become so much harder over the last couple of years. I've been a Harry Potter fan for over 20 years. Sorcerer's Stone was the very first book that I ever bought for myself at a Scholastic book fair, something that I'm sure a lot of people my age can probably relate to. I get being frustrated at someone buying and playing this game, but I can guarantee you that the overwhelming majority of the people who are not doing it just to spite someone else. I'm going to leave a pinned comment below going through some more of my thoughts so this doesn't turn into a 30-minute video. Please just remember that everyone here is human and to treat others the way that you want to be treated. Thank you. Hello, I'm LegenTerry, and this, as you're probably aware, is Hogwarts Legacy. Hogwarts Legacy was developed by Avalanche Software, not to be confused with Avalanche Studios, and published by Portkey Games. Avalanche Software were mostly known for developing licensed Disney games like Cars 2 and Disney Infinity in the mid-2000s before being acquired by WB in 2016, and they've been working away at this game ever since then. The first thing I'll say about this game is that, as a fan of Harry Potter stories and movies and some of the extended Wizarding World stuff, it fulfills the fantasy that I'd always imagined as a kid. Getting to attend the magical school of Hogwarts, getting to see all the classrooms, wander down every corridor, and explore every nook and cranny in between the locations we've only gotten to see in the movies feels like its own kind of magic. Every intricate detail of the labyrinthian school and its surrounding areas has been painstakingly recreated or created for the very first time. The original music, while it's not written by John Williams or his accompanying movie composers, does an amazing job of emulating their sound and weaving a perfect blend of nostalgia and wonder. The game also might have direct references to the movie score, but I'd have to listen a little more closely than I've had the time for. There are definitely nods to Hedwig's theme and some other similar tracks included. Now, there are a few technical drawbacks, with this being Avalanche's first big stab at a big next-gen open world game that I have to talk about though. I played in performance mode, and I think most people should in every game, if they want the best experience possible. But even in performance mode, there was the occasional frame drop or stutter. There are bugs with lighting and shadows, which sometimes show up in cutscenes, like the first few times you meet Professor Fig in his classroom. His face gets covered with like flickering black polygons. Sometimes if you try to spin your camera too fast, the edges of your camera won't be able to keep up with the rendering, and you'll see unfinished lighting and low detail models pop in and out. Load times that feel like they should be seamless weren't always, and sprinting through areas too fast means your character sometimes gets awkwardly hung up on doors while a loading icon pops up for a few seconds. These were pretty distracting at times, but most of them happen in areas with a high level of detail and no combat, so it didn't really impact my gameplay enough to sire me on it. Avalanche Software definitely understood the assignment though, and the atmosphere created from both the art and music teams on their own make for a very strong first impression. The Harry Potter series has always had a cozy vibe that nestles itself on the line between Halloween and Yuletide celebrations, and the developers absolutely nailed that vibe while adding their own creative flares that fill the lesser known corners of the world. Hogwarts Legacy is an action RPG and an open world adventure with puzzle elements. It's set in the 1820s, many years before the events of the stories we already know from the books and the movies. You obviously won't see any familiar faces, but you'll very often stumble across relatives in the lineage of formerly established characters. At the beginning of the game, you get to create your own character however you want, but some things feel a bit limiting. I assume they wanted you to look at least somewhat human, so there aren't sliders for every little feature in games like Skyrim or others, and a relatively small selection of hairstyles that would mostly fit within the time period are here. You are accepted into Hogwarts as a 5th-year student, which is an extreme rarity. You get brought there by Professor Fig, a teacher of magical theory at the school. For some reason, you seem to be special and have the ability to see and use a form of ancient magic that very few others can. Along the way, you learn about a villainous goblin named Ranrock who, for some reason, is attempting to gather an army and start an uprising against the Wizarding World. Fig asks the other teachers to give you extra assignments to catch you up to speed with the other students, and help you defend yourself against the followers of Ranrock that seem to take a particular interest in you. They supply you with a book that helps to guide you where you need to go and all the basic supplies for your schoolwork. From there, you get sorted into one of the 4 houses, or choose for yourself if you don't like what you get, and are sent on your merry way. Most of your opening hours will be spent attending classes that teach you new spells and techniques, meeting your classmates to build friendships and side quests, exploring areas around Hogwarts, and eventually battling dark wizards and beasts beyond the safety of the school's walls. Besides the opening mission, I didn't even see the outside of Hogwarts until I was about 5 hours in, but a lot of that is on me being a completionist who hates abandoning puzzles, even when I don't have the correct tools for the job yet. But for me, it really wasn't a huge deal because I appreciate all of the little things along the way. I can imagine some less patient players wanting to dip their toes into more of the action right away. Speaking of action, I guess we should talk about the gameplay. Firstly, it's an RPG. You collect gear based on color-coded rarity by defeating enemies, solving puzzles, and clearing quest objectives. The gear gives you stats in offense and defense, and presumably more layer in the game, and makes you more proficient at staying alive. Think modern Assassin's Creed games, but more magic and less stabby. As you progress through the wizarding ranks and quest lines, you get access to more and more spells and equipment that augment the way you interact with your enemies and the world. Combat can be likened to any of the recent character action games over the years, like the Batman Arkham series or God of War, with your primary focus on using your offensive spells and items to control the battlefield while dodging and parrying incoming attacks. Initially, I wasn't a huge fan of the way juggling your enemies through the air looked in trailers before the game released, but in practice, the mechanics feel much more satisfying and I was able to fall into the flow of the fights with ease. The more hits you land in a row and damage you successfully avoid, the faster your ancient magic gauge builds to pull off beautiful flourishes of magical brutality. Outside of combat, you'll come across lots of environmental puzzles. Many of these were just lock and key style deals where you just needed to apply the correct spell for the job, and sometimes I just wouldn't have access to that spell yet. Others were like treasure hunts that had me looking for things in the world that could interact with each other. With the more spells added to your repertoire and more traversal items at your disposal, I can definitely see combat and puzzle solving becoming more complicated than they appear on the surface at the front end of the game. I believe, though, that the main draw for most people who are already fans will probably be the exploration of the world itself and the new stories told by its cast of colorful characters. The writing and the voice acting in this game seem pretty solid for the most part. All of the teachers have their own backstories and personalities, and didn't leave me feeling like they tried to make a carbon copy replacement for those we're already familiar with. Some of the students, however, don't seem so lucky. They're a bit of a mixed bag, with some having their own motives, narrative arcs, and character growth, while others only act as set dressing. There were also a handful whose voices I really had a hard time listening to for extended periods of time. The narrative here is well presented, and the acting in the larger cutscenes sells the fictional world without getting too campy. The introductory mission from the game definitely hooked me from go, but left a lot of questions which I hope get answered in time. For the hardcore, there may be some slight deviations in the deep lore, but I trust that Avalanche wanted to put fun above pre-established rules. It does feel a little bit dissonant to play as a teenager who freely roams the world and kills off poachers and giant spiders in their spare time, but without these additional combat experiences, I imagine the player wouldn't get the chance to learn and to hone their abilities, and the game would become much smaller in scope. While those aspects of the game felt like they could be justified, I couldn't say the same about the menus and the user experience. Navigating through the map, quest logs, inventory, and gear screens is about as clunky of an experience as possible. Add to that the addition of separate tabs for challenges, collections, talents, mail, and settings, and the load times in between each, and you have a cocktail for disaster. Attempting to read the map alone is probably the worst aspect of Hogwarts Legacy, as you can't tell which floor your objectives are on and which floor you're on. Also, with a Floo Powder network making up the game's fast travel network, you have to make several button presses just to access those points, whose relative locations are unclear at best. Rather than rendering the maps artistically with a paper 3D model, I kinda wish the devs had stuck to what works and given realistic top-down views of the floors of Hogwarts that are stacked on one another. The guidebook does allow you to set waypoints and gives you a line to follow in real time, which alleviates some of these troubles, but not all of them. Another pain point for me was the game's looting and appearances system. At the beginning of the game, you're given a pretty small inventory space, and it isn't really apparent when you should be getting rid of your old equipment. That pile of equipment, by the way, can look pretty awful when combined together. Luckily, they thought ahead and allow you to change the appearances of any of your gear to that of the gear you previously collected. But with the good comes the bad, as you need to do this for each new piece you equip, rather than for the slot that it's put in. With the frequency at which you change your gear in this game, it felt like a major oversight that I hope gets patched down the road. Even with all those issues, they didn't feel like enough of a deterrent to keep me from enjoying Hogwarts Legacy. If you're coming into the franchise fresh, there's no avoiding the confusion that comes with learning the rules of a storytelling universe that's been built up for decades. But if you're already a fan of Harry Potter, I would expect that you would feel right at home playing this game. I, for one, can't wait to dive back in and experience more of my student's journey while discovering the secrets of the wizarding world.